144 times 12 is 1728. These form the EDON imprints, the EDON cells. So we have 1728 keys, one that goes with each of the 1728 particuli that are in the EDON clusters. All right, 1728 particuli, tachyon cycle 7. There's something that happens. We didn't get into these yet. This is not shown, right, at the time that we did these diagrams. It was the Rashalah Ta'ur. It's called the Starborn unit. Starborn unit has 1728, again, times 12 equals 20,736 particuli units. Got bigger again. That would be on cycle 8. Now, when we get into these cycles, they have to do with what's called the cosmic clock. We call it the 6 cycle or the 12 cycle, but there's actually 8 increments to it, which it's the cycle of the octaves. And it's through this cycle of the octaves that each of them are a spark generation cycle through which tachyons are formed. I won't go heavily into that now, but what these numbers refer to when I talk about tachyon cycle 8, axis 8. Axis 8 actually brings you back to 0 point. If you start at 0 point and the first particuli unit and the triad would end up at 0 point, then you go 1, 45 degrees, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 brings you back up to 0 again. Okay? There's a whole series of rotations that have to do with these spark cycles, and this also has to do with the cosmic clock material that we've been talking about since Ireland the first time, I think. So there's a lot of that was ages ago. It feels like a million years at this point. So these are all connected in together. It's a very coherent system of creation, and someday, if we ever get a chance, we could do the books where all the details, right down to molecular biology here, molecular structure, atomic structure, would fit right into this whole pattern. But there's not time to do that right now. Yeah, next one, please. Now this, it is actually through that starborn cycle that we just saw from particuli going up through to where you got 1728, then you've got that times 12, you got 20,736 particuli units building these light cells, these core light cells. It creates an expansion pattern that is literally the expansion of the Cathara grid imprint. This is what actually forms the cycles. This is, if you put a circle around this, you could have the 6 cycle, what we call the 6 cycle, and it's actually 12, but it goes 6 one way and then 6 back the other way, so it makes a 12 cycle. These are actually time cycles in larger scales, but they're also the creation and expansion cycles. If we start, the 0 line starts here, and let's say this is the top of the first Cathara grid, the first, the triad, right? And it does it, the triad does its cycle and forms the Taran. The Taran would form here. There's the next expansion level, where this would be the top. If that was the top of the 0 axis, the next one, going clockwise, expanding outward, is the 1 axis. That would be this would be the top of the 1 axis. This is the axis that the Taran unit would be on. And a Taran is supposed to look like the 1 ball on the top and the 2 on toward the bottom with the 1 at the center. When we talk about the planet Earth and having its Taran harnessed, it was turned upside down to where you have the 1 on the bottom and the 2 upside down. And they've actually been putting this out on the internet as a meditation aid on how to meditate with the planet. Yeah, great. So turn your light seat upside down to make sure you plug into the Metatronic grids. And they even colored them magenta. They made the Taran upside down with the Daisy of Death configuration all over it in magenta. So you could use it as a meditation aid to help with certain grid work that was being done at the time when this was being activated in the planetary grids. I mean, it's so in your face out there. People miss it, you know, it's like, yeah. So anyway, this is the expansion cycle. The Taran would be on the 1 axis. The next axis would be 45 degrees, would be the 2 axis, and that would be the Taran, the dyad. The 3 axis would expand out here, would be the myad, or the seed, right? The 4 axis would be myad, dyad. Monad would be on this axis. And what I'm talking about is the top point. So if you're going to draw any one of those light cell configurations, you would do it on a Cathara grid structure, and the top point would be the top point of that would be where the axis is that it actually formed on. Because what this whole thing is doing a rotation. Every time it finishes a tachyon cycle, goes in, pops in, the one that that went in comes back out where it was, but the one that comes out as its replica shifts 45 degrees in 45-degree rotation. So, and it expands at each one. The top point, which means the length of the Cathara grid, which means the size of the sphere, is expanding at each one of these points on the clock. So you got 0 axis, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. When you get to here, these are the 6 main tachyon cycles and the 6 main expansions in one full tachyon cycle set that create the first set of starborn units. When you get to the 6, now remember, we had already gone up to, I believe 7 was the 1728 of the Edon structure, and when we went back to 8, we were up to the 20,736 Partakai units. So something happens when you hit 6 cycle. It's 6 cycle because tachyons start to do something different. They start an acceleration process in here, because in here you have what is called, this would be the 6 axis, this would be the 7. Between 6 and 7 you have what's called the, in terms of the planet, on this level it's called the Hetharo electrical peak, which we just passed yesterday as far as the planetary grids, and the Hethalon magnetic peak, which are acceleration periods in the tachyon cycle and accelerations of quantum as well. And then you have a cycle in which the energy rides in, pulls all in, comes back out again into what is called the Ruchete reset cycle. And we've talked about these in terms of the larger planetary cycles that we've been going into, even when we hit the first Hetharo. And that was a big thing in 2003, before we ended up in Starburst and Starfire and all this other crisis intervention stuff. We were talking about these periods. We were talking about this 6 cycle. What we didn't talk about at the time was there are specific increments of expansion of the sizes of the light cell spheres. And they are the design of the light cell spheres is very specific too, which is what is that starburn cycle, from where you see the triad to the taran to the dyad to the myad to the monad and all the different configurations of light cells. Each one goes with one of these levels of expansion. Next one, please. I better hurry up and talk faster. What these cycles of expansion also show are a spiral of expansion, a spiral of outgoing energy of spark currents. These are called the winds of Ala Ale. They have to do with the first Partakai units back there and the first sparks and the Ala sparks and those kind of things that I'm not even going to try to remember off the top of my head. But it goes back when the taran itself is being formed. And right, the taran was like at the number 1 axis, where it went from triad 0 axis to taran 1 axis. So these are, anyway, spark currents that come out as the light balls are expanding out. The light cells expand out with each pulse inward, then pop back outward. There's these currents of energy that spiral through the balls and around the balls and out, and they form what is called the crystal spiral. And that crystal spiral is very specific. It's specific to the mathematics inherent to the Cathara grid. It is specific to the amount of quantum that is held within each of the levels of the light balls that expand out in the starborn cycle. It is very, very specific. And what it definitely is not is the Fibonacci spiral. We call it the Fib of no chi spiral, because it is the Metatronic spiral. And what it is symptomatic of is something that has the mutation of the Metatronic mutation that is actually sucking energy off living light spirals. The natural crystal spiral has its proportions and its shape. They're directly corresponding to the sizes of expansion, the numerical sizes of expansion between, within an octave's clock, as this is called, with its 6 plus 2 axes. All right, this particular one starts at 0. The energy comes out at 0 and then goes through 1. It's going through the 12 points. Notice what would be Cathara 12? Because remember, these are all rotating. So on axis 0, number 12 is there. On axis 1, it goes 45 degrees. Number 12 is there of the Cathara grid. Of this number 2 Cathara grid here, 0, 1, number 2 Cathara grid, 12 is here. So it is following, is running through the 12 points, the Cathara 12 points in each of those levels of expansion. And it forms a very specific curve and a very specific spiral. What's neat about this is what it becomes when it reaches a certain point. And remember, each one of these these axes represents a tachyon cycle that is a replication cycle that allows for the pulling in and then popping back out as the next level of expansion. Next one, please. If you trace the size of the spheres of each one of those cycles, right? If you trace them in that expansion, what I've done here is got rid of some of the stuff that showed what you just saw before, but it's the same proportions of the grid. It just shows you what the size proportions of each of those spheres would be that represent the triad, then the taran, then the dyad, and the myad, and the monad. And it's funny because they correspond to what, when we've done other parts of Cathara things, we've gone through what is between, all right, if you have a Cathara grid and you have the 12 point and the 1 point, and you have the 6 point, 5 point at the center of the Azare, and the 5 and the 8 point, there are certain points, like between 5 and 8 you have a Miage field, between 8.5 and 4.5 you have the Kethra field. All right, these all correspond directly to those fields, and it was funny because we got those other fields before, and those diagrams that had to do with Cathara grids in general in the fields. We didn't have the expansion ones, but when we got the expansion ones with the mathematics, they fit perfectly, which is kind of neat, because what those fields are formed by is this process of the star-born cycle, where each of these expansions with each has specific quantum, specific joule count, as far as how much energy is stored within the center of those particle. And that is the energy that when a substance is burned here and they calibrate how much heat or work or energy is released by the burning fully of a substance, it has released its etheric joules. And it's funny because they just so happen to have named the heat increment that scientists use to track this joules. Yeah. Like, no, there's nobody here on this planet telling scientists what to do and whispering things in their ears. Not at all. It's just our imagination. Yeah, right. It's right in the words. I mean, some of the words are hilarious because they are the actual words that have to do with the metaphysics of things that only ETs would technically know. And they pop up in science books, or they pop up with people with names like Watts and things like that. Volts, right? These things are actual word signatures. And do you think it's an accident that somebody that was going to someday discover something that was going to be called voltage just so happened to be born into a family with a name that was called volt whatever it was, right? These are planned. These are not accidents. So there's a lot of this anyway happening in that Starborn series cycle that will bring together yet another piece of things that we saw before. Right? All right, here is the same size Cathara grid that you saw on those big diagrams, the same expansion cycle, right? It is showing each stage. All right, it is showing first the triad at the 0 axis. I believe, did I start with the triad? Or did I start with... Yeah, let me see where I started. This is axis 0. So I started with the triad at 0 axis here. And then I did the taran at number 1 axis. And then we put in the number 2 axis dyad. And then number 3 axis myad. Look, you can start to see that it's getting bigger now, right? And number 4 axis, the monad. Number 5 axis, the hub cell, the mataur. You move that way, I'll move you this way. There we go. That's coordination. The number 6 axis, which is the starburst unit, which is the divine blueprint. That is this one, the 144. We have over here, getting bigger again, is the 144 times 12, 1728 Edon set. And this has to do with what we're activating and the spheres within which we are going to end up going in the middle worlds, the proportions of them. These also, on their own, phase and create those clusters of 15 cells that we're going to eventually have in the K23 manual. All right, so those diagrams plug into these. I don't know if you have any idea what it takes to do these diagrams, because they have to be proportionate. Everything has to fit. You have to make sure this is the right size compared to this, compared to this, compared to this, and it's all based on the Cathara grid. So you have to make sure, if you draw a Cathara grid, you make sure it is of the right proportions and not too skinny, and make sure it's a square, divided in half, and then half of that goes up the top, and that's where you find the point, and on top of the point. Very specific. So if you wonder why sometimes we don't have all the detailed diagrams done, look at what we do have done and imagine more detail than this. Now you know why. So here we are on this is where we go back to the 0 point it was called axis 8 because it would be the 8th rotation, but that brings you back to the 0-point line. This is the Rashala or. This is the, what I can't read on here, and this was 1728. This was 1728 times 12, I believe. Is that the 20,736? That would be that one. Now remember, every time one of these pops out, it does its little phasey thing. It does its Kelana spark, making the Kelana sparks form keys. The keys then do more sparks and form tachyons, and the tachyons build up charge until they finally pop the creation point, open the diamond door at the center of the creation point, pull it all in, replicate it all, and send out a backflow that is the next level up. All right. So we're at this point when we get back to 0 point. Now, this forms after this, but in between here is where we have something interesting happening with those spirals. And this is where we reach a point where the Rashala state is reached. And in that Rashala state, after the Rashala state occurs, then there is this configuration, which is a set of 2 15-cell seed atoms. So all of this star-born cycle leads up to the birth of what is called the seed atom. And the seed atom is called the Yanesa, the 15-cell seed atom. But it actually births 2 of them. So there's actually 30 cells to get birth. And this is the beginning of the outer manifestation, or the outer creation domains. A long time ago, we talked about the Yanesa seed atom, but I always wondered where that seed atom came from. It had something to do with that monad that we didn't know what for ages. What exactly was a monad? A monad is number 5 up here. That is the, where is it? No, where are we? 4? No, it's not 5. It's number 4. It's right there. That is the monad. All right, and the monad actually creates the Amarea cell, and the Amarea cell then creates the, whatever it was over here, the Edon cell, and then the Edon cell creates the, what is this one called again? The the 20,736 one. And then that one, when it finally phases, does this little neat flame thing that I'll show you in a second with the spirals. Then when that comes back out and rebirths, it rebirths the manifest physical, you could call it physical seed atom, that becomes the core out of which the light body structures of the outer Eucatharista form. As if it wasn't enough balls already. Next one, please. Now, if we look at that spiral again, remember that's a spiral that emerges from the expansion, right? It's a spiral of spark pulse currents that are running through all of these cells that are forming, all these levels of the bodies that are forming. When you hit axis 7, and then it shifts to axis 8, which is back to 0 point, this is when an arc of frequency comes back down, and from the 0 point line, a reverse cycle starts, a very quick reverse of the same thing, where it starts again tiny, but builds up this way, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, where you end up with another counterclockwise spiral going in the opposite direction that carries the opposite polarity charge. And I think we have one there of what they look like together, I hope. Look familiar yet? All right. And when that point is reached, when that part of, when a full first to 6 cycle, where it does the 6, and then it does its Rusite reset, and then it does its Hetharon and Rusite reset, then it comes back and does the reverse cycle, another 6 cycle, as they're called, as a 12 cycle. That represents 1 12th cycle. That 12 cycle creates the flames of Rashala, the core flames. And when that occurs, when this one finishes and they cross over here, when the arcs cross through, then a shift occurs. I think we have the next one, please. And they shift into this position. Right? This is where we start to get that core flame of Rashala being built. It is built by the tachyons that are progressively forming. It starts with the taran and its little pulsations. Every pulsation creates Kelana sparks. Every set of Kelana sparks builds to form keys. The keys build to form tachyons. The tachyons fire and open creation points, send it through. The taran goes back in, replicates, come back as a dyad. That keeps happening until we get all the way up to the starborn cycle, until we get to the point where you got the full starborn cycle. Then you got the really quick reverse reverse cycle of the opposite polarity currents, which probably creates the starborn units to go with the other side. All right, that's probably where we get Laettori and Laettori, but I'm just speculating on that one. Then, when these complete, the two cycles complete to complete a 12 cycle, it shifts from the 0 point axis to the 1. And of course, there'd be another expansion cycle that one axis would start as the 0 point for that one, and then would expand out from there. Technically, I believe there are most things are I think there can be variations at this point where I believe you need a minimum of 2 12 cycles. So there are one level of expansion there, and then there would be another one that after this occurs, there's a couple other things that occur, then there is the final, and I think that's starfire, or at least part of the starfire process, where the Rochelet goes in, and the whole thing comes back out, and that's where you get the birth of the Yane-Sa seed atom. And that, I believe, requires another Yane-Sa cycle of where the seed atom expands, using the same proportions out, to form the outer layers of the outer domains of the Eukaryote body. And I think there are things that have more than 2 12 cycles that must be really, really huge, or things that maybe have only 1 12 cycle that don't come out into the outer manifestation. I'm not sure about those technicals. I'm speculating on those. But it all has to do with this, and this has to do with what we're activating. Now, this has to do with the Christ star crystal capsule and all of those things. Pardon my lips sticking together. I'm getting a little bit tired. Oh, good. Yes, I think I would. Yes, please. Yes. Almost done, though. Getting there. This was the hard part. Trying to link those pieces that are some of the most technical bits that we've had, to link them together without getting too technical and not have you go to sleep yet. You're doing really, really well. Thank you. Yes, please. What that looks like when you get rid of the other stuff around it. This is the shape of the flame. Can you bring it down? Yeah, thank you. This is still, when it made a shift from over here, right, up to here, it forms a standing wave flame set, standing wave of multiple layers of radiation. And this is the Rochelet core flame of Rochelet. It is interesting because around it you will have the Amareya flame, which is the outer flame body flame that will form. But the core flame that forms through those inner layers of creation is different colors. The Amareya flame is that emerald color, the emerald flame. That's where you get emerald order and all that kind of stuff. This flame is really pretty. It's got numerous colors. It's pale pink would be the outer bands. Then it has pale gold, and then pale silver, and then pale blue in the center. And this is a celestilite blue and pale. These are all pale. Celestilite blue, gold, and silver. So there's these configurations of really beautiful flames. I'm going to do a flame body painting someday that's going to be a walk-through one where you can project through. I'm really looking forward to that because these are absolutely gorgeous when they're in color. I mean, just to see them, they're really gorgeous. I also imagine now that we're doing this through the aurora fields, there will probably be some portions of it that take on the neons, the neon heliothallics. And I believe they're kind of like iridescent neons, where they're not as harsh as like, neon in your face like those hunting jackets are orange. Not that kind of neon, but more gentle. So this is how the flame is formed. It's formed through that starborn cycle. That starborn cycle is the natural process of the living light cycle. That's how those outer cells of the Eukaryote body form. And next one, please. Thank you. When you take this down to your personal level, as far as the phasings of your own Taran light seed that would be in here, and your own starburn cycle, and the formation of your own light body. When your Rochelet flame activates, this would be your density cathara grid, okay? So you also have inside of this your D3, D2, and D1 cathara grids, and each of them would have its own tachyon cycle, and it would have its own little flame that would be proportionate like this to its cathara grid. So you'd have the D1, 2, and 3 flames within you, but this is the one that would be outside, coming outside of your body this way. This one here would be the pink one. This would be the pink band here. This out here would be the Amareya flame that results from the radial body, the density 1 radial body activating. So you'd have the emerald flame, and inside of the emerald flame, you would have the core flame, and it forms here, and then something really cool happens. Next one, please. Just a little convoluted here. Can we see the bottom a little bit, honey, please? That's a bit more important right now. Yeah, that's good. We'll start there, and then we'll come down. Let's say this is Earth, or Eartha, whichever, is a planet. Okay? The other diagram you just saw, where the body was standing here, with its azure here, and its Cathara grid, and the flame was here, right? Well, what the flame does when it fully activates and begins to rotate is it affects the matter levels of the body in a way that it will pull the entire Cathara grid up into full Amareya flame, where this flame that was once at the chest, right, now is below the feet, because you are in Rashaleh. And where your feet were on the earth, they are no longer, because you are floating in your flame. This is the key to levitation and stuff, by the way, too. I can't wait. I really so very much would love to float all of us in where we all said, let's go activate our Rashaleh and go visit, let's say, I won't name any names, but somebody else's workshop, and just ask a question. And just come in, right, and ask a question about anything, and we're all like in the audience, right, just walked in, right, and ask a question about levitation. And see what the answer is, and then perhaps give a demonstration and just all rise at once. And people are going, oh my God, the masters are here. We go, no. You can learn how to do this, really. We're just like you, except we took the other class. Right? I would love to actually be able to do that in a loving way, not in a mean way, but really to prove a point that, I'd invite the teachers too. Come on, let's do this. We can all levitate together. Anyway, this is what Christic light body activation does. This is when you fully activate, where you're not just going up and down in the outer domains. This is when you're going back into the core domains, where the core flame as well as the Amareya flame body activates, and both of them will activate. This does some other interesting things too, because it does a replication process where it ends up with, there's one up there, one over here, and one over here, and I don't know what they are yet, but I've seen them already. They're not putting them on the diagrams yet, but I'm sure they'll explain at some point, where it looks like a 4-leaf clover of flames coming from the center. But this one is really neat, because depending on how it spins, once you get into state of Rashaleh, depending on how it spins will depend on whether you go up or down, and the speed at which you go up and down. I believe it's clockwise. You have to spin it clockwise, and it makes counterclockwise vortice, but you have to spin it clockwise if you want to anchor in and come down. Right? And if you want to go back up, you spin it the opposite direction, and it makes a vortex going in the opposite direction of the way you're spinning the flame. Right? The deflection field would be the vortex that spins around it. So it's very interesting. It also is a configuration that is for Akasha Merkabas, which I don't think I have a picture of an Akasha Merkaba here, but they are the large Merkabas. That it took one. We were all excited about being able to build one to get to the Eka once upon a time, back in 2003. Well, now we're going to build 4 really fast, right? So we can get back in to at least the Edon levels. Next one, please. I'm getting there. An hour over. Okay. Anyway. Can we put this up a little bit, honey, please? Yeah, cool. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's where legs used to be, right? Because you're up here now in this, and that's the planet you were on down there. Now, can you bring it down again, please? There's a whole bunch of other things happening with this, because the rest of your crystal body and light body structure doesn't go away. It goes into this formation. You still have your shields. Your Cathara grid is still in there, and actually your Cathara grid begins the formation of what's the Christ star crystal capsule, the inner core crystal capsule. You still have shields, the 5 shield levels that are spinning all through this. There's a lot of spinning going on in this thing. You have the ascension tube that you've been working with here, right? There's lots of parts to this flame body. And let's see, which this one was meant to point out. Yeah, this is what the activated Rochelet flame body looks like. And, and they call them, this is a new word for me, quadraphonic. Whatever that means, it refers to the flames of the 4 directions, where you end up with this one, but a replica of it, or something that looks like a replica of it anyway, that gives you the 4-leaf clover configuration inside of and running through, not just inside of, but running inside and outside of the Christ Star capsule. Next one, please. And this one was the Christ Star crystal capsule, which is highlighted a bit more. See, at some point I'd like to highlight these where you still see all the pieces, but like say you want to talk about the Christ Star and you make that like a color or something. Color would be really great. We've been doing black and white for a long time here. But anyway, this shows you more of the configuration of the Christ Star capsule, and it really is built upon angles of frequency that run through the Cathara grid, where I believe this would have been the K11 point, that would be the K12 point, and the K1 point would have been down here, K2 point here, K5 point here, K8 point was up here. So the Cathara grid actually bends and becomes I don't know how many sides actually there are. If you count all of these, if it's a 3-dimensional structure, it's one of those again where I go slightly crazy trying to count actually how many sides. It's like trying to count the facets on a diamond without losing track of your first one. All right, where did I start counting? Right? Was it this one or that one? I get slightly wacky with those, but this is the shape of it if you were looking at it. It is very different than the shape of, I believe it's possibly, it possibly is 12-sided. It possibly has 12 planes. It might have more. It could have 28 and 24. It could have 48. I don't know. But it is something it may be some form of a dodecahedron that is not truncated, because the truncated dodecahedron is the stuff that comes out of the Metatronic code after it does its the sextant activation that creates the 6-sided crystal. That does something else to become what is their 12 faceted crystal, I think they call it, that is a truncated dodecahedron. And this one is not truncated, which means it still has its points. And its points are what allow it to connect with the, what is it to connect with? That's a good question. Planetary Merkaba field? Okay. With the planetary Merkaba fields, the points are important. They'll get to that later. But the fact that this does not have its angles cut off here implies that there is an open flow of energy running through the points. And I do believe there's probably more that comes in that has to do with bringing in other parts of self. But for now, we'll get our own self through as far as this self that we know. But this is what we are working on now. This is what the Aurora Force will bring us back the ability to do that we wouldn't have been able to do because of the mutations that are in the teleospheres. Because through all of this, all of the teleospheres must activate. They must activate their little, what are they called? Ruta clusters. So those 60 teleospheres must activate their Ruta clusters. And those Ruta clusters form those what look like crystal tower cities, this way and this way. They form their own little Christ stars all the way through the crystal body teleosphere levels. That means inside and outside. At a certain point, you can fully activate this, and it all folds up, and your body demanifests, turns into conscious cloud, right? And the entire thing pulls into the center, and that's where you become star-fireable. You can go into the edons, or you can keep star-firing if you can hold the frequency, and go all the way back into the hubs, the edons, or you can go further back into the full crystalline core, or you can go back fully into source, which would be following the point of original creation all the way back into source. And then you can come out again, and you still have your full memory matrix. That is what a true, fully graduated, ascended master is. And the ones who are running around that we're going to run into tomorrow, that are running around in white robes and things, these guys don't have a prayer of even being able to teach a class about this. All right? Because this has been protected information, because they've used it and abused it before, because they've gone after the hubs and they've tried to. It's really dumb to do, because you'll get fried. And they have, and then got mad at the hub people. It's like, excuse me, if you didn't try to invade my house, it might not have fried you. You know, you have a really, really good electric fence at the door. You know? So anyway, next one, I want to get through these really quick because we do have to get going. I promised I wouldn't keep you up late tonight, and it's already late. I want to go through just I'm going to whip through these really fast. What? What? Yes, what? Okay, these. How many do I have here? My God. Yeah. Watch. Just watch. I will talk these as they fly by. Okay? I'm just going to show a few pictures. Let me do these because I just want to whip them through fast. Okay. All right. We know that the Taran light unit is supposed to have its top ball up and its two balls down, right? This is the meditation that's been being put out and used by some groups, right? That is the reverse. We call it the bug eye ball because it looks like bug eyes. It doesn't look very friendly, and that was the one that was in magenta. Okay? Now, okay. That is connected to what we've referred to as, did I lose one? No, that's the one I wanted. As the threshold grid. The threshold grid is a harness that harnesses the natural light seed, and it turns it. Now, this thing here, this over here, was actually a crop circle that was meant to interface. It was one of the only one, I believe our guys have said, was theirs, because they meant to interface with the threshold grid to try to get control of it before it could activate. This was way back. This is, I forget, 2002 or 1 or something that this appeared in England someplace. Right. Yeah, it might have been 1 or 2. I can't remember which year it was. But anyway, it was our guys' attempt to interface with the threshold grid so the ones who were at the time Anu people that were activating the rest of the beast machine would not be able to activate that part. They were trying to counteract it, but it didn't work. It didn't stop what was being done because there were other wormholes opened at that point that were able to override our attempts to override their attempts to override the natural Taran. So it's been a bit of a battle here. I do want to show one thing. Up here in the corner, you'll see when I refer to the Metatronic cube configuration, I'm referring to this configuration of balls where you should have a Ruche configuration. It actually first forces together the ones that would normally be not even there and there, they'd be here and here, forces them together, and then splits the ones on the side. So it makes them the 5, 5 first, and then it splits the horizontal 5s, and it ends up in this configuration. It's called Metatronic Cube. At the center of Metatronic Cube is the Daisy of Death seed. All right, that is the configuration of the 666 dyad that forms the 666 seed of death, let's call it, which is the seed of the Daisy of Death. Now, this is the Fibonacci spiral, the Fibonacci spiral. That is a thing that interfaces with the natural crystal spiral and sucks its currents off and bends them in a different direction to create the Fibonacci sequence of unnatural expansion. It is a way to create things by vampiring energy off natural living things and creating a facsimile of what was the original creation. And that's what the whole Metatronic code is doing. It's an attempt to recreate the first creation by creating a facsimile of it. And there's some really dumb explanations in some of those books that say the reason why that God couldn't figure out any better way to make the Fibonacci spiral as closest to the golden mean. The golden mean is the golden meanie. It's called the golden serpent spiral. It is the natural spiral that comes out of the threshold activation. It is a Metatronic spiral as well. And I remember seeing there was some kind of thing written, and I believe it was quoting one of the teachers that teach these things. They said God couldn't figure out a way to make it perfect, to make the perfect golden mean, so the Fibonacci spiral was the closest God could get. what God are they talking about here? Seriously. If God is really that dysfunctional, we're all in a lot of trouble. Right? So anyway, this is how these pieces of things fit together. This is the natural configuration of the Taran. The Taran unit has 3 Partakai, and at its center, the Partakey generator. This is where we get the 3 keys of Enoch, and this is the key generator where the sparks are generated by the Gelesic states that exist within the Joule storage centers inside of the Partakey. That is where the sparks occur by the rubbing together of the 3 Enoch through the Partakey. So this is the natural configuration of what the Taran light seed should look like. Not that. That is, it turned upside down and made a real mess of with these. Notice they are hexagrams, right? Notice they have little flowers, but they're not the lotus flowers, the arcs that we talk about. These go out at what we call the 60-degree spread instead of the 45-degree spread, which means they are phase-locked and they cannot go up and down because these light cells can't breathe. And it is because they are phase-locked into same spin Merkaba configuration, all of which are a product of the Metatronic code. Next one, please. I'm really running out of breath at this point. This is just comparing the natural crystal spiral here and the Fibonacci spiral here. Now when you put them together, you get the natural crystal spiral. It's easier if you trace them backwards. Runs here, where these points are, right? Notice something about natural crystal spiral. It has a center point. It starts at the center. It is always on center with itself in its expansion. Notice here, and this is something that Noel discovered for us, actually found mathematically, and it's quite fascinating because it's in the mathematical numbers as well. It actually doesn't have a center, a relationship with the center point. It doesn't have a center, and it builds off-center all the way through because it doesn't have a natural center. Why? Because what it's doing is it's getting its energy from interfacing the natural structure at a certain point. And at a certain point, this is the natural structure here, it actually grows faster and creates a harness around the first expansion levels. And then at a certain point, because the frequencies are still stronger in the natural crystal spiral, it breaks beyond the Metatronic Fibonacci spiral harness, but it still harnesses these energies. What it tries to do is take out the creation by building more quantum. And if you can really amp up a Metatronic spiral and apply it to a density level or a dimensional level that is smaller than the one you're building it in, which will have weaker currents, you will be able to override and harness and grab those currents. So you always have to go after the smaller guy. Right? You can never try to take out somebody with a Fibonacci spiral that's your own size, if they're Christic, because they'll always override you with frequency. Because this frequency that runs the crystal spiral is much stronger. It's coming directly from center, from the natural spark pulse currents, and it will just naturally blow through the Metatronic spiral. But if you can use a higher dimensional, say like a density 3 Metatronic spiral to go after a density 2 Christic spiral, it still won't work. But to go after a density 1, it will. Because there's so much difference between the frequency spectra in density 1 compared to density 3. So that's how they interface. They interface with a higher dimensional spiral of the Metatronic Fibonacci one to attack the smaller ones in the densities, the weaker ones in the densities below. So it's a really, really nice philosophy behind all of these things, too. Yeah, and it's before when you realize that, remember that the spiral, the crystal spiral is built on, starts at the 0 point axis and then it builds out through the 6 cycle. It's an interesting place where you get 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now what's happening here? Right around 6 is where you still have the crystal spiral is still inside and the Metatronic one is still outside. It's between 6 and 7. Which is, and it's right almost between the two. So it's right where you go through Heath-Arrow electrical peak and into Heath-Alon magnetic peak that the crystal spiral actually accelerates and breaks out of the Metatronic hold as long as it didn't get cut off from its natural cycle and turn back in on itself, where it will actually roll up into the tube torus configuration, and the energy will be hijacked and it will be cut off from its natural currents. So this is, you know, it's evil. And what is evil? It's live spelled backwards, right? And it really is. And if you're going to talk about axis of evil, try the Fibonacci one, right? What all that creates is this mess. It creates the unnatural ecliptic in the planetary shield. It should be a horizontal shield running on a vertical staff. We've got this tilt of the Merkabas. We've got the ecliptic shield. That creates the precession of the equinoxes. It makes it so the Earth can't have its natural arc interface with the solar arcs that come through. The sun has some problems too, by the way. It's not just the planet that has these problems. It creates what's called the poison apple seed. All of these have to do with what's called the daisy of death configuration, right? Instead of the lotus of life, where you have the 45-degree arcs coming, and then you have 6-point lotus, yes, but you have 45-degree arcs, and the natural proportions of the natural Cathara grid, they are the arcs that can phase up and down and spark and move the light cells back and forth so they can move through each other and make more sparks, which is another part of the mechanics of how natural living light bodies work. What you have with this is you have all of these other pieces, the demon seed configuration from the core, the hijacking through the Fibonacci spiral of the energies creates what this particular configuration, which phase locks the arcs and rips them down and phase locks them into the pillar points, the roof-shaped pillar points. It pulls in the entire Cathara grid, making it smaller and completely changing its configuration, and it harnesses the energy. Now this cannot move its arcs. Its arcs are stuck. Its Merkabas are stuck. They become same spin sets, where one set, top and bottom, will go clockwise, and the other set, top and bottom, will go counterclockwise. One set is from the PCM universe, the other is from the antiparticle pKa side. And when you put them together, they create a set of artificial vortices, because you have one solid object spinning in one direction, one in another. It creates an artificial Merkaba field that force blends the particum and the particate universal structures. So all of that is also creates, it squashes the natural radial body structure that would go with the Cathara grid. Now, this applies to every little cell and molecule that's affected by this. It also applies to the planet or to the galaxy. Right now, we know our planet bulges at the equatorial poles. Why? Because of this. It would be rounder. If it was on its natural structure of Cathara grid, it would have a natural structure crystal body. We've got the bulge at the poles because we've got the compacted Cathara grid that results from all of this. So we got the poison apple magnetic fields. Remember, there should be the Yan-Yun flow, where you have the rod is activated, where there's currents flowing through the rod. There should be one set of currents coming up this way, and another set of currents coming down, down this way. I get totally dyslexic when I'm trying to draw those without the diagram under them. Anyway, they should have, should look like a butterfly, all right, where you have the rod, the natural rod, as well as the staff running frequency, but we don't. Our magnetic fields resemble this configuration because this is the configuration that's holding our magnetic fields on the planet at this point in time. We have the 23.5 degree shift in one direction, and we have an 11.5 degree shift in the other on the poles, on the what should be the natural pole that would align with the solar pole. Next one, please. Part of this lovely mess also has to do with this nasty set of spiraling vortex frequencies that emanate outward. This is called the gravitron machine. This gravitron machine has a control point that comes up through the Gulf of Mexico, and it's what's been progressively, because it's been being activated over the last year or two, has been kicking up storms there, and I don't imagine that's going to get much better anytime soon, because the gravitron has been activated, and it was actually the Budhara that brought it into activation, and they used it to snap to finally, in this Vecca. See, we have one on the planet. It plugs in to a huge one that runs the entire Vecca. This was part of the beast machine that through all these wars and things that have happened, they built this gravitron machine that was meant to be able to take the Vecca the Vecca grid and literally snap it from its axis and rotate it where you want to drag it down a black hole. And that's exactly what is happening because it worked. However, at least there's still an escape system. So these are all part of the Metatronic mess. This configuration of the gravitron is built on, instead of the natural Ruche configuration, it's built on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, which gives you the 5, 5 both ways, but is really 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4 plus 1, which is a mutation, a force bond of what was the Ruche forced together. What that will create once it activates is that Metatronic cube, where you have the what looks like spheres on the daisy of death axis. All right, that is what's happening in the Telea spheres now. Okay, this configuration in each of the little Teleas in the Metatronic Telea spheres is now being activated, and these will split and form the Metatronic cube configuration here and here, so it will look like a 6-axis, and that will form the sextant or the hexagonal shaped crystal Death Star capsule around the planet, and from the atomic level all the way up and through. It is also happening in the Vecca, so it's a bit hard when your universe is falling for your planet not to be in trouble. But we are going to be able to do the Rochelet activations now. Let's see, where am I? Yeah, we'll just go. I'm going to go through these quick. This is enough of the misery to give you the idea. One more thing that is interesting up here is a small version of what you see in a minute. If you'll notice, there's something interesting happening in the twisting of the energies. When you get all those angles where they have one part of the crystal body of Earth twisted at 23.5 an axis, another twisted at 11.5. What are they doing with all this? Oh, it was very intelligent, because what it did was create a tube torus situation with the natural energy flows, and it creates what's called the yin-yang flow, which is not natural at all. It is part of the Metatronic configuration, and that's really sad, because there's a lot of people that's a sacred symbol to, that really think it's good luck, and it means well. And when you meditate on it, it just simply helps give you optical pineal induction of the coding that will activate your tube toruses and your Metatronic imprints. So there's been a lot of trickery used on this planet. All of this is plugged right into the DNA. We are in the process of the last of this mess. This mess won, but it really didn't, because there are still many people who will make it out of this Vecca system. They'll just have to take the lower gate instead of the higher one. They'll have to go down through the density 1 system through Rochelet in order to complete Starfire. But they will be able to have some amazing stories to tell once the rebirth cycle comes out, because they will be the old wise ones that have seen stuff that most beings don't ever get to see. They got to experience a fall in process. They got to find out how much you could do and what you just couldn't really do, what you could fix, what you couldn't. So someday we will be the ancient elders to many other races that explain this to them and help them, hopefully, before they get to this point. Okay, this is what this looks like a little closer. See these bits up here? These are nasty vortices. These are the trumpets. The trumpet vortices, these are at the poles, both north and south poles of our planet, and these are the broadcast stations that have been activated now that the gravitron that runs through them has been activated. These are all part of the system that was meant to make Earth tumble, and not just Earth, but also our solar system and our galaxy tumble into the black hole. The black hole they were aiming for was the Wysadek black hole, actually, and just because karma has a way of doing funny things, it's now going to fall into the Wysadrak black hole instead. So that's why amnesty contracts are up for tomorrow for all those little Anu who caused all these problems and finally found they lost the game, and they really don't want to go back to Wysadrak. They don't want to do with that. They don't want to deal with them because they have treated them very, very badly. And karma has a way of repeating itself, particularly in a black hole where there's nowhere to run. So, good thing there's guardians. that can open gates and say, okay, if you give back what you stole, you can go back home, right? And be, you know, like house arrest in your own house, because that's basically what it's going to be. They will be quarantine matrices after Starfire. They will have access only unto themselves. They will blow their Metatronic code enough where they will not be able to splice in to other matrices. They will only have themselves to fight with. And at least this way, the Weesadex and the Weesadrax will be kept separate from each other, because they will create a big mess if they get into a war together. The Weesadrax are going to be very busy because the Thetans are going to try to create a war with them in their own matrix once everybody they can get falls there. No wonder the Anu and the other guys want out on to the other side, because that's a war you don't want to be a part of. So the Budhar are going to go back over to Weesadak side, and so are the Anu ones that can't make it into any rising, you know, any of the rising paths. So this is the mess we're dealing with. There's a whole bunch of those little yin-yangs all over the place in this configuration. You got one down there at that pole, you got one up here at this pole, you got this big one floating around here. These all form this torus net field that is the internet. Yeah. Yeah, connected to the internet. And what do you do when you use a computer, particularly on the internet or anywhere? Computers are great because you stare into them, right? Optical pineal induction at its best. Yeah. Who's staring at who, really? Especially when it's live on the internet. And now you don't even need to be live on the internet, because technically, if they really want to, they can find you even if you don't have a blue card or a Bluetooth or anything like that. They will find you if they want to. But it's not worth getting paranoid about. At this point, we're doing enough with our frequencies in our bodies that we can transmute those kind of things that are just environmental hazards that we will pick up, and it is still useful to use computers, so I certainly use them. Have faith in your body's ability to transmute things. Just don't be stupid. Like, don't just say, oh, great, so I can go, like, take some acid and have some fun like they used to in the 60s just because my body can transmute it. Don't push your luck. You know, things like that are very not helpful, and they really chemically override and leave the doors in your body open to all sorts of things you don't want there, because you may wake up and you're not in your body anymore and somebody else is. So I suggest not trying those things. Anyway, this is showing us our VECA, again, our VECA system. We are over here now in the PKA side. What would have normally been a ball that would have been the light body cell around us is now, this has actually tilted where it was at this angle because of the gravitron activation. The gravitron had been here. They activated it, and the Budharas over here in this black hole system pulled it this way, and they caused it to rotate this way, which it has in the last year. And that caused, when it hit the center line of the VECA, it kept going, and it pulled it, and it snapped it. So it is, the VECA is now tilted at this axis. In here, actually, is where you would have, you know, had your ECA, your ECA core in the VECA system at the center. And in here is where you would have had SG1 on the ECA level, and that was called Brennoway. And back in seeding 2 period, I believe, there was a war that was happening where they were going after the ECA, and part of Brennoway was destroyed, and part of that fell, not the whole thing. Then another time, this was a point that had been hit various times. This is important because this became a point in between our universe and the PKA universe that was called Telos. And that is what's connected in to the Shasta grids. Now, what is called Telos used to be part of the SG1 star system that was of the ECA. And in 208,216 BC, during a set of events called the Fall of Brennoway, some of which were down here on the planet, others of which were literally taking place in the galaxy, part of that gate was destroyed in the ECA, and it fell, and it was harnessed into a position up here that runs on the center line between them, and that gate was used as an interface between the black hole systems here and the black hole systems down this side. Now on this side, this is the PKA side, this is where you have the Weesadrak black holes. Now remember, these guys are from an adjacent Akasha. They're like way over there, but they have wormhole links that link through. So it's through those wormholes that our VECA will now, because it's been pulled to this axis, it will follow the gravitron, and it will tumble at some point, the entire Vecca, which is better for the planet because if the planet goes by itself, you end up with pole shift, where you end up with your North Pole on your South Pole, and that's really not a great place to be if you're a life form walking around on the planet. However, if your entire Vecca goes, your galactic plane is staying unto itself. It's like it's a fall situation that could have more localized damage if it was a smaller fall. So there is a chance that it will remain stable during this. I don't think it's going to. I think there's going to be a point, but oh yeah, that was Starfire. All right? But I don't know. I've not been through one of these before. This is my first time in a matrix that ever did quite this, and I think that's probably true for most people here. Right? I know. We gotta get out of here. Yep. Okay. Anyway, these are the distortions of the light cells, where the light cell should have been here, and now with the axis over here, the light cell should have been here. Now the light cell is over this way. What we are doing is we're pulling everything viable down into density 1, and we are going to take that ride through the Rosh Hashanah there that will allow us to go in through the Eden hubs, into Eden and into the hubs, and it will take us out of harm's way when that fall occurs, so we don't get sucked down with the boat, in other words, right? As if, we're a boat and it capsized and you want to get out of there before it sinks and pulls you down because it makes a vortex when it sinks. All right, so Starfire will allow us to pull in to the middle domains, the Eden domains, and then we will rebirth back out again, and there will be a new system set, and the people who manage to make this trip will find themselves in those new systems. There's also something called the Rainbow Bridge that just began to activate in during the Easter period. Can we have the next one, please, Annie? No, I don't need those right now. This one I haven't. I need to cover this somewhere. I didn't cover all of this, though. These have the little drawings. Yeah, this part I need to show. Okay, now, we're going to get back to the teliospheres for a minute. We're going to go through what's most important on these. Remember the teliospheres, right? All right, first of all, I wanted to show you one little thing. It's a really sketchy drawing, but remember, this is just a telia, right, with its Ruta cluster in it, a natural one, following the Ruche configuration. Now each one of these would have its light, it's a light cell, light ball. It would also have its Ruta cluster inside. When the Ruta clusters activate, I don't know if you can see over here, it's not a very clear drawing. It was just a little sketchy one. Let's say this was D2 surface Earth. All right, this arc here, this line here, as if there was a Earth here. Let's say this was the D1 teliosphere, because technically the D2 teliosphere would be out here somewhere, because they're much larger than the little area where the solid level of matter forms. So the D1 teliosphere would be here with its Ruta teleus. When they activate, they send out, each one of them sends out a pillar of frequency, and it's actually a stacked pillar of frequency that carries all of the subharmonics that are contained within the encryption of that, of each one of these pillars. So each one of these becomes a crystal, they don't call those towers, they call those templars, a crystal templar. There are 12 crystal templars. Then there's big ones that form around them. There'd be one at the center, the 13th. Then there'd be one big one around these four. That would be the 14th. And then there's one, I believe, that run these. That would be the 15th. All right, so there are technically 12 plus 3, or 15 pillar things. I'll tell you why I call it things for a minute. Pillar things that emerge from an activated telia. Not this whole sphere. That's just one telia. All right, so the ones on the outside, the big ones on the outside are called towers. So there are 3 towers, and the others are called templars with 12 templars in them. That would be the natural configuration. They send these spikes of crystalline light that are stacked with the subharmonics in plates, both upward and downward from where they are. Now, if this is the teliosphere of D1 down here, right, and it actually holds that configuration, right, and it's beaming up its frequencies, the telia is staying down there, but its frequencies are coming up in these long streamers, And when you see them, if you're standing on surface Earth, they look like these amazing towers that are made of crystal. They look like etheric crystal towers. The natural ones would appear in this configuration. You'd see a large one in the center is the 13 one. Then you would see a set of 12 that would be positioned. These might be miles and miles apart, but you can actually get a remote view on where they are, and you can actually see them as if you're looking from way up in space, where you can see them and actually find the land areas that they're emerging on. They would be the natural ones. Now, what would happen as the planet was naturally preparing for starfire, all of these would activate. First, the ones that corresponded to the density 2 shield would activate, and then the 1 and the 3 shield would activate. First, the ones connected to the D2 shield would activate, and then the ones, and then the 1s and 3s together. So it would be the center one goes first. Now, we're starting to see these on D2 Earth. These that we're seeing here belong to the D1 level. If these are already starting to pop up, that implies that the ones we're not even seeing that went first were the ones that go with D2, that would be going way up into the atmosphere and those kind of things. It implies that the D1-3 cycle of the activations is taking place. Ours were not the ones that started activating. The threshold ones were the ones that started activating. The threshold ones are not built on the Rouchet configuration, but they do the same thing. But they first of all, they do it in they're dormant in the 5-5 position, and that 5-5 position turns into that Metatronic cube position, and that will be the configuration of the 12 sets that you see going up, where it's the Metatronic cube. I didn't have time to paste that over here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I have to see it. I'd have to look at it again. Anyway, it's the Metatronic cube configuration. I have it someplace. On the next one, please, maybe. This helps to give you a proportionate relationship a little bit. As far as something else, if this is the Eartha teleosphere, this is the Earth teleosphere of the same level. All right, so this is the twist. We have Eartha. Earth is natural axis is this way. This is the Eartha natural axis and the natural horizontal and the natural vertical. You've got Earth in there that was hosted in this way in its natural axis. But then Earth went through all that mess with all those vortices all over the place and is now tilted this way, where you've got this sphere tilted here at the 23.5. You've got the 11.5 tilt there. What this does is bend all the excitonal lines and meridian lines of the Earth level, not the Earth level, but the Earth level. And this creates this wacky grid that somewhere, on the next page, I'll show you. I have, next page. I just enlarged this, the proportions I showed you on the other one. Now I'll just show you a bit of the wacky grid that forms from those twists. If you take the 23.5 mutation here, right, and say you're just going to draw the spheres to show where the 5 shields go, right, it'll give you the one set of swooping lines. If you take the 11.5 one and start there, and draw at the right angle to the 11.5 degree tilt, there are these cross grids, and what they end up forming when as they're running through the natural grids that are running through from Earth, that would be at the regular vertical and horizontal, it creates this. And it's when I have to work on these a bit more to show precisely, but it forms a grid of what looks like triangles, interlaced triangles, that are referred to as the racial grid. They're the distorted racial grid of the Metatronic code. They are the things that, better late than never, are being turned over to the indigo shield to do something with at this point. And the only thing that can be done with them at this point is help to control the degree of damage that occurs during fall. So we are having the racial grids, the natural ones that go with Eartha, that were always technically under the Guardian's control, and these messed up ones. See, there's little smaller ones that run in here. These should be the natural ley lines and meridian lines and axiom lines of the planet, and they should have their parallel ones that form the horizontals from the pKa side, and when they come together they would form the natural full racial grid that would allow for the planet to go into its natural, just even outer domain ascension. That can't happen anymore in here. But it is this grid that we're dealing with, and so I believe it is the same grid that somebody, I think in Germany, came up with, that they're discovering this particular, they're mapping it, because they've actually, Russians? I was close. Over there someplace, you know. So it was, it says it was a Russian scientist that has been discovering these just on playing with the electromagnetics, right? Like understanding all sorts of navigational things and stuff. Yeah. So this plugs into those things that are actually being found by other people. So I just wanted you to understand those things, the relationships between the Earth sphere and the Earth sphere that is falling. This outer one will not fall. It will go into starfire. This area here between the Earth shield and the falling Earth shield, this is the aurora field. And this is what we've activated, this band here. This band here will break down and start breaking through all the electromagnetic barriers that were put up. There are all sorts of static fields and messes that are formed here by the Metatronic mess of this. It will begin to allow us to have elemental access directly to the Eartha frequencies. So we will be able to be conduits that will allow for the aurora frequencies to tap into anything that's left here, like the cluster maps, the arc gate clusters, will be able to, because we can serve as conduits for the lights of aurora, be able to run them into those clusters. So those portions of the Earth can actually be pulled into Eartha when it is time to starfire, so they will make it through. That'll be really interesting to see what Earth looks like when you take just those cluster maps and stick them together, probably in a Rouchet configuration. What might that planet look like? I don't know, but we may find out at some point. So anyway, next one, please. I'm not going to go through all. I don't need those. Yeah. All right. Yeah. I'll just show you that. This one. Yeah. Yeah. Because I do want to get past this. All right. I will point out here that again on the Talia sphere, when I talked about the 5-5 mutation of the Talia. Here is that. When it activates, they spread apart like this. This is supposed to be the Rouchet configuration, and it isn't anymore. They spread apart like this when they activate, and this is the configuration that their rutas will come up in, and it forms this unnatural hexagon capsule that's called the Death Star capsule inside each Talia. It is also what forms on the larger level around the planet, and this is what is activating now as we are beginning our Christ Star activation set. This is in reaction to the fact that threshold activated and began this process, and once this starts, it can't be stopped. It can be, you can pull out of it and stop it from being in your own body unless it has already fully engaged. If it's engaged, it's going. And at least it is a harness field that if things are going to fall, it's better that they fall harnessed, because at least some facsimile of them can pull through the transition. And that's probably what the ones going for fall are heading toward. We are not going on that path. And there's still a lot we can do by being on planet and making the frequencies of aurora available to the other life forms that are still here and have no idea that this is happening. You know, we'd be glad to teach them, but most of them don't want to listen. And that's been a problem since way before Atlantis, but it was a big problem in Atlantis too. At least you guys are listening, and I'm very glad that you are. And I'm very glad that someday we'll probably be able to go to a lovely party together, hopefully not at 3 in the morning. Right? I just want to show the bigger cube real quick, yeah. Okay. That is showing bigger, the Metatron cube configuration. All right. That happens after the 5-5 splits. It creates that configuration, and that is a configuration that you will find of the distorted Metatronic ruta. These form the glass towers. They started, the first time I saw them was not in Phoenix, but around Phoenix, like further south than Phoenix. They started popping up in the desert. I'm going, what is that? You know, like, that doesn't look friendly. I don't think it's one of ours. What is it? You know, and that was that thing that was like the thing I saw in Greece a long time ago when I thought, gee, I think there's going to be an earthquake because I'm seeing these plates shift. You know, these are time tunnels when they activate naturally. All right, they activate naturally and allow the Rochelet effect to happen so you can skip through and go right through the center of time when they're natural. That's what hours are going to do. They're going to allow us to transcend the time barriers in the crystal body structures and go back into the core in order to be protected from this fall, and it will allow us to come back out again. These will allow time travel too. They will take what is harnessed by them into the Wisadrak fall. And the ones that are already Metatronic that are going for petition to fall the other way are also going to have this configuration, but it will have a different core code that goes with the Wisadek matrix, and they can only get that code by picking it up through their amnesty contracts, and that's part of the things we're going to be delivering tomorrow. Drop what you stole at the door. Be nice if council has approved that you can go through. We are simply here to hold a field where the door opens. If you're nice about it, fine. You may see if you get pulled. You may see some weird action in the astral where, somebody said they were going to be nice and all of a sudden they're trying to take wax at Azarites or something like that. That disqualifies you of your contract. Bye. You're going Wisadrak. You're going back where your karma put you. So there's going to be all this happening tomorrow. Yeah, oh, joy. It will take forever to talk about that. Just want to point out here that as of Easter period, there was an intercept. What was done by the Taran activations that were done, the natural Taran activations that were done during the Easter period, allowed for an interface to occur by which the Metatronic spiral that was coming this way and the crystal spiral that was activated and released with the winds of LA, it allowed for them to interface in a way where there was a third point, a burst of frequency that allowed part of the Metatronic spiral to be pulled partially out. Not all the way. It couldn't be, the base pulse rhythm couldn't be picked up enough. This had to do with an Aurora, actually, activation that they didn't tell us about Aurora then. I guess they weren't sure if they were going to tell us about Aurora. They wanted to see how this held, probably, because we might not have been talking about Aurora if we had to get, evac'd in 3 days or something. But we actually, the beloveds released from the gates, from the hub gates, they allowed the release of the winds of LA, which is the crystal spiral winds, and they interfaced with the Metatronic that was being released by threshold, and it was enough to break part of the Metatronic frequencies that were harnessed off and get them into a mid-zone base pulse rhythm that created what's called the rainbow bridge or the rainbow region. This will give a period of evolution during this period while we're all riding together through to the point of starfire, that there are people who would have been races who would have been caught in these frequencies can get pulled into the rainbow, and if they can raise their base pulse rhythm enough, they will be able to make the crystal leap into the crystal spiral so they can go into Rochelet state when starfire occurs. So there's a whole plan built on this, and I do believe that this rainbow region corresponds with, if you looked at those as spheres again, this rainbow region corresponds with the aurora field, and it will be the lights of aurora that hold the frequencies of the aurora field that will hold the rainbow bridge potential. If it comes to the point where all of this collapses, the ones who have activated lights of aurora and are holding it will raise in base pulse rhythm quickly and be pulled into crystal spiral for evac. And hopefully we will be able to ride through. I don't have dates on this yet as far as how long it's going to take, because we are basically here where those spirals intercepted and split off. And however long this bit takes, I don't know yet, but that's the time frame that we're in the middle of right now. Or not in the middle of, we have started. We're entering the final countdown to something called Starfire. I don't need to go back into those, no. Oh, God, that's the part we didn't get to. Okay. I want to whip through these really fast just to show you something. This will come. This is page 1. Right? No, actually, this is this is after 3 pages. This is page 4 that gives you a summary of some of the things. What the history that I've mentioned about the dragons and about the races, some of whom we're going to meet the guardian versions of from the adjacent matrix. It comes down to taming of the dragons and other beasts of burden. All right. Right now, this series of 3 pages worth of tracing from 250 billion years ago down through the fall of Metatron 150 billion years ago over to the Wiesa matrix and various other periods like 137 billion years ago, when the fallen equerry races that I mentioned before from that matrix came over here and put on dragon clothes by interbreeding with the Omicron Draconian fallen ones and the Odedicron fallen ones. All right, that's where the dragon races got started. All right, there's a whole 3 pages of scribbled history on this one so far that will be forever if I try to do this tonight. What it culminates into is we got dragon wars. All right, we had dragon wars. In fact, the whole period of wars that we talked about since, when did they say they started? They said, when did the dragon wars start? That's on the other thing. I think the dragon wars started, let me see the other, if I can read that off here, because there's a period that's funny. The dragon wars encompass, no, that's not when, no, that's when they were formed. No, there's one part I want to see on this. Oh, the Dragon Wars began 102 billion years ago. This was after several really wacky things that took place between the Equerry and the Anunnaki, or Anu before Anunnaki. But Anu races from here that went Metatronic after the fall of Metatron went over and raided the Equerry races, and they were really upset about it. So the Equerry races came back over here, interbred with the Draconian races and the Odedicron races, and went after the Anu. And there was a fiasco for a very long time before humans ever got here. Before we were created here. And that fiasco was referred to in various stages of it. One was called the Vecca Wars period, another which was like across those Akashas, they were fighting through the wormholes. Another one was called the Dragon Wars period that started 102 billion years ago, that involved the different factions of dragons and their different alliances. Some of them Wiesa-Drac, some of them Wiesa-Dek, some of them Anu, and some of them hating Anu, all of those things. They're also called the Matrix Wars. I love how fiction mimics reality. You know, the Matrix movies? They were based in part on that. Okay? So there's other things. These dragon wars culminated into what this is before the angelic humans were ever created, before the Oraphim were created, but it was not before the Azarites were created. So there were these dragon races that started out as really the Equerry, which were a fallen version of the hominid, albino hominid aquatic bird people. Okay? That were good guys, Christic ones, over in the adjacent matrix, right? The group of them that fell, trying to help the ones that had fell over here, that they shipped over there, trying to fix them, right? All right, so the Equerry were not dragons at all to begin with. They took on dragon chemical clothes, which means ended up with dragon form, when they crossed through the wormholes, and the only way they could fully get into this matrix over here was to hybridize. So they hybridized with both Omicron and Odedicron. Odedicron are reptilian, and Omicron are dragon moth races. So they created a race line that were called the White Dragons. The race line, the full race line, they also call them the M Dragons, because they were called the Maladaka Dragayon. That was the name of the races. This is where we got the word dragon. All right, they're not dragons, but they are dragons. They're actually dragon forms, like reptile-ish persons. But that was more like the costume they wore, because inside, if you looked at the soul level, it would actually read like a hominid aquatic bird person crossed unwillingly with a fallen Anu Jehovian dolphin people type person, which they didn't like either. Okay, so there is a whole war set that took place before humans were put on the scene. Tara was supposed to be a place that helped heal some of the mess, some of the dragon races. The dragons ended up splitting as far as their alliances, and they started out as one race, and then you threw in the Thetans, and the Thetans were the rejects that both the fallen Seraphi and the fallen Anu both rejected. They were a hybrid fallen hybrid Seraphi and Anu put together, so neither would own them, and they got very, very disgruntled about the fact that nobody wanted to claim them as part of their collective, so they decided they'd try to conquer the universe, but all alone it was a little hard to do. So eventually they got involved with the dragon races, and even though the dragon races were created by the Equerri, who were hell-bent on destroying anything Anu, because it was the Anu that raided their matrix and brought in the Metatronic code, which they never ever wanted there. They took them out of they had fallen, but they were happy with that because it was a Christ fall. They blew their Christ fall status, and they wanted to destroy the virus called Anu. And part of them joined with what were also rejected by the new, yet still Anu, but still part Anu, which were the Thetans. So one group of the dragon races that were the Equerri, when they came over, they became dragon races. One group sided with the Thetans because the Thetans shared a common interest where they wanted to destroy the Andromeda bioregenesis nurseries for the Anu that hadn't fully fallen that the Emerald Covenant races were working on, because we would try to help anything that could be bioregenerated. That's what Christic beings do. All right? You don't just kill it because you decide didn't like that form. If there's life, there's hope. If it's not fully Metatronic, it still has ascension potential. We have an obligation to try to assist it back onto its path of evolution. So at that point in the histories, our races, the Azurite races and the Guardian races of all the matrices that were involved in this, were trying to help with the Andromeda nurseries to rehab some of the Jehovians and the Jehovian Anu who had fallen. And this really upset the Thetans because they hated everybody, and they especially hated their own kind that rejected them. And, of course, the Equerri dragon people hated the Anu because they had Metatronicked them without permission. And so this started an allegiance, one with the Thetans, that would go after and destroy the Anu, and another group that looked at the Thetans as Anu and wanted to destroy them and didn't want anything to do with them. This ended up causing a split in the Weeses. Now, we also already had Weeses, Weesa Drax in the PKA side and Weesa Dex in the PCM side. Well, at least they got along relatively well at that point. It started wars between the Weeses because one of the Weesa Drax sided with the Thetans, I believe. Yeah, the Weesa Drax, yeah. Weesa Drax sided with the Thetans and what became the Red Dragon races. That's where the division occurred. The Red Dragon ones became the ones that sided with the Weesa Drax and the Thetans and thought it was a good idea to go wipe out the nurseries of Anu and anything else that crossed their paths. Then there were the other group that didn't want to do that of the dragon races. These were the Green Dragons. They sided with the Anu, and so did the Weesa Dex. And this is where you have all these divisions happening way before. And then somewhere down the line, we also had the Budhara getting in on it, which was a real mess. It culminates down into these alliances now, where we have the end of the Matrix Wars, or the Dragon Wars, taking place here. These guys crossed with our races on Terra and Gaia, and they are also part of the Earth races too. This is why all of us have some degree of dragon coding, mostly in the angelic human lines. A few of the indigo lines have a bit of the dragon coding. This is not always bad, because some of these races, there were certain points in time where members of both of these got sick of the whole thing. They weren't fully Metatronicked yet. They were on their way there, but they were still capable of bioregenesis. So I forget what the time frame, I think it was 100 billion years ago. This group called the Gold Dragons was formed. These were formed on petitions from remnant groups of both of these that didn't want to play these agendas anymore, that asked for assistance in bioregenesis. They were brought together, and they were mixed with other, I don't know what they mixed them with, in order to help bring the codes back up and purge out what parts were Metatronic. But they became the Golden Dragons, and they were the first level of the Christic dragon races who had been brought back from being partially Metatronicized back into this. They were still dragons, but these were the golden dragons. And it has to do with what they look like, too, when you see them in the astral. And there are green ones, and the green ones tend to be the water dragons. There are the red ones. They tend to be the fire dragons, and they've got wings. And there's the little gold ones that tend to be a bit smaller. Some of them can be very big, but they have little wings. And I think they're, I don't know, I think they're the air ones, and these guys are the fire ones. The red ones are the red ones are the fire ones, and the green ones are the water ones. So we got a bunch of dragons, and we have races descendant from the dragons. We also have the blue dragons, which are very interesting, because the gold dragons, once they had 100 billion years ago, they completed their evolution and were returned to a Christic status, but they were still far away from home because their original home was way over on the other side in the other matrix, but they were going to stay to try to help evolve their part of their own races that were stuck here. Then we have the blue dragons, who were some of these guys that were crossed again. This is, I think, 1 billion years ago, I think this was. The blue dragons were created. These are the magic dragons. These are the indigo dragons. These, yes, indigo dragons. The Azorites had to get involved, didn't they? Just can't mind their own business. Yep, they worked with some of the golden races, and these, let's say, the lines of the angelic humans. See, this stuff comes through really fast, and it's like really scribbled. Anyway, there are some of these races. These were 100 billion years ago. This was before Orifim were created. You know, the angelic human line was created, and they were meant to help heal the wars and the mess that was going on with these other dragon races. We've got dragons coming in by the dozens at this point in this thing, because there are green dragons running for cover. They want their pass keys to get anywhere that's not Wisadrak Fall, right? So we've got dragons running in all directions. Yeah, okay, it's 2 o'clock. All right, I wanted to touch base with these, all right? All right, I'm sorry. I have kept you up late, but it's not horribly late, and I better stop. Anyway, they wanted to let you know. I'll show you really quick, just whip through from page 1 to 2 to 3, just so you can see it fly by what some of these lines show. I'm gonna quit.